Craftsmen online podcast. They've been here independently. Brother Adam Kendall and Brother Chris Ruli, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
For our 3 YouTube live streamers that we have, Ruli's doing some sort of head bobbing, like he's like a fighter in the corner, just ready to come out when the bell rings. I love this.
I'm ready to go. I'm excited. It's good to see you. It's good to see Adam. I talk to Adam once a week at least. Sometimes when we're really, well, we'll talk about it more. But there's a paper that we like to work on, and so maybe we can talk about it more than once a week. So excited to see him in person.
Absolutely. It's
nice.
It's not often that we all get to see each other. We hear each other's voices all the time.
Yes.
So usually I'm in the car, he's at work, or at home, or
vice versa.
I can call from driving, and that's where I spend, a good half hour of my life getting to work. So
hear you on that. And ironically, I hear both of you in the car or my headset when I'm running or driving to work, as well as guests on the podcast. And independently, you're both brothers who are well known within the Masonic research community. But as I was corrected before we got started with the podcast today, one of you is a member of 2 of the big 3. The other is a member of, I guess, one or all 3 of the big 3. I only know about the Allied Masonic degrees and the Southern California Lodge of Research with the Fraternal Review. So let's kind of just level set there. When it comes to Masonic research, where does it fit in, and what opportunities are there for brothers that want to pursue this?
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, well, let me qualify or define what the big 3 means, and it's not something that's hierarchical. There are several different research organizations, and they've been very popular for a very long time. But what you termed as the big 3 is the 3 most well-known. One of them is the oldest, and that is the Quater Coronati Lodge of Research, number 2076 in London. They have the Quater Coronati Correspondence Circle, which is a subscriber-based society which the majority of people will belong to. And then there is the actual lodge, which has a different set of criteria for membership. But with the Quater Coronati Correspondence Circle, that's been in existence ever since the lodge, pretty much since the 1880s. And that allows subscribers to come to the meetings, participate, and also receive the annual transactions, which is AQC. That's the easiest way to say it, which is the full name is Ars Quatuor Coronatorum. And then the second one, which is the second oldest, is the Philalethes Society. And that is the oldest independent research society. That it is not a lodge or attached to a lodge. It is a society that is independent of all jurisdictions. And that has been going on since the late 1920s. The third one is, I am having some technical trouble here. I'm sorry. So the Philalethes Society, let me back up, has been in existence for over about 90 years. And then so that gives you a sense of how long that's been going on. Then there is the Scottish Rite Research Society, and that is the youngest, having been begun in 1991 and publishing its first volume of Herodom in 1992. So that gives you a sense of when you receive your volume, now you know why the new one will be 2023. So we're always a year behind. So we're always trying to stay current to the year. So we'll publish the year before. So these are the big 3 that have distinguished themselves. But what you'll see are contributors that go across lines. They contribute to all 3 of these, plus the other ones, ones that are just as famous, such as the Texas Lodge of Research, mighty as it is. And then the Southern California Research Lodge, which also publishes the Fraternal Review. So many different contributors will contribute to all of these. It forms a sort of network, a quilt, as it is, of Masonic research, and they all have their own sort of focus. we could speak about this later on, but one of the issues I have with the Scottish Rite Research Society, not in and of itself, but when people hear the name Scottish Rite Research Society, yes, we are intended to do research on the Scottish Rite, but we have, we are expanded outwards to doing research on fraternalism writ large, right? We do like our research into Scottish Rite Masonry and indeed high degree Freemasonry. So that kind of gives you a little bit of, it's not just for Scottish Rite. I get that question a lot, but that is the big three, I guess, if you want to call it the big three. Of course, you have AMD and other invitational groups that do have an emphasis on Masonic study, on Masonic research, and they are all effective and valid in their own right. Chris, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add to that, when you mentioned the AMD, I believe just for the sake of clarity, we're talking about the Miscellanea, which is the publication of the Allied Masonic degrees. And just like Adam said, all of these bodies, these three bodies, produce different stuff. They aren't the bodies themselves. As Adam said, the lodge, Quattro Coronati Lodge, it's a lodge. It meets, it has regular meetings, but it produces a QC. Scottish Rite Research Society, as Adam mentioned, produces Herodom in addition to something else called the Plumb Line, and then any other symposium or whatever that may come in a given year.
Correct.
Philalethes, the society, is the society, but it also produces the Philalethes Journal, on journal and Masonic letters. And then, Texas Lodge of Research produces their proceedings, which include papers. Miscellanea is the paper, or is the journal that the Allied Masonic degrees produces. And I think Adam would agree with me. They vary in terms of the types of papers you would get, the level of scholarship, the rigor as part of that scholarship. Certain brothers like to maybe orient themselves towards certain publications, while others tend to, focus on, maybe submitting to lodges of research within a state, or, these sort of different other bodies. So I agree with Adam completely. It really is a patchwork of Masonic research across the country and across the globe. And so if you don't know that, especially for me, when I started this about 5 or 6 years ago, when I started writing my first papers, I didn't know where to go. There wasn't like a one sheet that was like, okay, if you want to do this, go here. You sort of have to stumble through, and you have to figure out who the editors are, and then they'll guide you to where you need to go.
It's a really strong point that you just made, because I'm thinking of all the things that we hear about in Blue Lodge, because that's where all of it, let's say, begins, right? You hear about the charitable groups that are available within Freemasonry, all of the leadership things that you could possibly be involved with, the community service, the other organizations just within our Blue Lodge, within our craft. Very rarely do you ever hear about, hey, there's research opportunities. And for brothers that are into this, these groups that you've talked about, they cover everything from history to the central figures, to central times and places, to ritual, to the esoteric, to way deep into the ancient mysteries. I like to kind of describe Masonic researchers as fellows, because there is that opportunity for you to earn that title, fellows within the fraternity. So as you kind of alluded to, Chris, like if we have a brother that's listening and is like, hey, I'd like to start talking in lodge, or maybe there's this thing that I'm writing on or I'm researching upon, is approaching a research opportunity like Fight Club where you don't talk about it? Or are there like applications that you can go seek to learn more about these organizations?
Go ahead, Adam. No, please go ahead.
Oh, no. I was going to back up a little bit, because in order to help with this question, it's important to know who who is in these organizations and why we're even here talking about it. We introduced these quote unquote big three. Chris and I happen to be we're in two of them together. I'm the president of the Philalethes Society, and he is the third vice president. In the Scottish Rite Research Society, I am the editor of Herodom, and he is the associate editor. So, and then with QC, I'm the junior warden. to answer that question, you would go, what application can you make? You can sign up to, obviously, to subscribe, but you could approach us if you're interested in publishing. You can approach us for those two organizations. Now, I need to qualify with the Philalethes. We are not the editors. Worshipful Brother Sean Iyer is,
Right.
and has done a phenomenal job for over, I think, at least 15 years. A little bit less, but for a long time, he has been editing the Philalethes, and it is a quality quarterly journal. Whereas the with Herodom and AQC, those are annuals. Those are
Right.
important distinctions. So there's the two of us in this, where you would make contact with the editors of these organizations to read your paper, to submit it. If you're interested in subscribing, of course, there are the websites, and we can perhaps give those a little bit later on to make application to these.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about, I think Adam would agree. I hope Adam would agree with me on this, the following statement, which is you do not need to be a Mason to join these organizations. Non-Masons can subscribe can join as subscribers to get the journals, to get the papers, to get the things, and they can read and learn about what's going on with research. You do not need to be a member of a specific state or an orient in order to join these as well. So I'm a member of the correspondence circle. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm forced to go to England to participate in the meetings. They just get mailed to me or they get emailed to me, and that's fine. And so I think the thing that I would start by saying is, or my introduction, if a brother, Michael, you asked, well, someone wants to start, where do they start? My thing is give them the resources, take a look at those 3 or 4 websites, the websites for the Philalethes, for Scottish Rite Research Society, for the correspondence circle, to get access to the AQC. They're all freely available online. They are relatively cheap. Let me say, certainly, if you combine all 3 of the big 3, I think it's about $60 or $70. I'm not really sure, but I think it's a minimum of $60 across all 3. So $180 for all of those, and you would get a journal every year. You would get access to all those things. So, and as far as I know, you can actually pay to get a back catalog of some of these journals and and then we also republish. So, for example, the Plumb Line, which is the newsletter of the Scottish Rite Research Society, they published a large book that basically encompasses the first, I think, 15 or so years.
Yeah.
And so you can get access to those back documents. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is, number one, you do not have to be a Mason in order to join these organizations. Number two, even if you are a Mason, there's no jurisdictional issue. You can apply for membership and you basically become a subscriber. You get access to all these things. Number three, you also don't need to be a member of the organization to submit papers. So even if you are interested, you have this really great or interesting research idea, you've developed a really good paper and you want to submit it to us, but you are allowed, obviously, to submit the paper without being a member of any of these 3 organizations. We will certainly take a look at it, depending on where you send it. I'm sure Adam and I will be happy to review any papers that you're willing to, or you're interested in submitting. And then if it's not appropriate for our journal or for one of these journals, we can certainly share it with the network of other editors to make sure that it gets published somewhere else.
Just don't send your paper to all of them at one time.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
Do
That's
not,
right.
please. I cannot emphasize how much that should not happen. And why, you may ask, is that when a publication decides to publish your paper, they gain, you and the author and the society which publishes it gains certain rights of publishing, first publishing rights. And if someone else publishes it without us knowing, it's embarrassing and it just looks bad. And so decide which one you want it in first and then try on the other ones. But simultaneous publishing, even in the real world outside of Masonry, is even more bad.
Very discouraged.
So it is discouraged across the board. So that's just my disclaimer. And Chris makes important notes that it is a wide berth, that gives us strength in being able to present different perspectives on Masonic and fraternal research, because obviously Freemasonry nor any other organization exists in a bubble. It is a cultural and social history dealing with several different individuals, different time periods, and it is incumbent upon any researcher, historian, etc., to understand the world in which these organizations exist. They do not operate independently whatsoever, right? Even the deepest esoteric recesses have a certain point in which they begin to exist or become popular, right? So the study of these cultural events or social events, which give birth to these ideas or concepts, events, all come from somewhere else. And so familiarizing yourself with a greater history is very important if you're just starting out in Masonic research. But because we have such a wide net, it allows people of different disciplines, not just historians, sociologists, analysts, etc., are able to participate, and they're all very important. That all of this, of course, with history, you need that sort of input. If you're doing any sort of demographic history, you're gonna have people who are analysts with demographics, demographers. You're going to have statisticians, et cetera, helping you if you have not already done that yourself, right? I, for example, did not. We called on others. I'm not very good with math, but it does come in handy, and you need this you need this wide net, and this is why it's great too that we can get a variety of brothers. And that's why we have a wide variety of organizations. You could say, well, that's too many. Why should we should just have one? Well, that's probably been tried, but we all have different perspectives and different agendas or different in any case, you need to have you need to have different perspectives. These organizations will take on their own character. I'd like to think that the ones that I have direct control over editing, that would be the Scottish Rite Research Society, that we are happy to take papers, of a variety of subjects. Again, it doesn't have to just be Scottish Rite, but we want it to be compelling. And often, if it's new information, we want to get it first. But of course, I wouldn't call it competition, but we are in league with the others. And so, again, if it's not necessarily our cup of tea, we can recommend it to the others. And you'll find that many of these organizations, they all have similar people contributing, and that allows us to make new friends. And a lot of us are professional researchers or professional historians in our own rights. And so having that network, that can only help history. Chris has said this before on your podcast, and I'll repeat it, is that, and you've mentioned it too, Michael, is you gain a whole new, it's its own fraternity of friends and brothers. And we're able to help each other. If I'm working on a particular subject and I can reach out and see who can, if that one brother or individual brother or not doesn't have the information, they may have a resource as well. So that's the reason why there's a multiplicity of organizations, and with the similar people working with them across the board. And that also helps us have consistency too.
So I'm going to take my time asking the next question so you have time to think, because you're going to hop back in your time machines on this one. But I want to picture yourself, because when Chris mentioned he started kind of his research journey 5 years ago. So I want you to think back to when you first started doing this to where you are now. And quite simply, what have you gained? And Adam, you were kind of setting some of the larger framework, like what you value now as being a member of some of these societies, some of these organizations. But what have you gained from being a member of these Masonic research groups then to now?
I don't mind jumping in as Adam's thinking about his response, but to me, I think certainly the broad scope. When I first started, I really started Masonic history or my work on one lodge. I was focusing on digitizing and getting my one home lodge up to where it should be, where you have digital records, where you have transcriptions, where we can easily access stuff. And if people reach out to me, I can quickly go through their membership catalog and figure out when a certain individual was raised. And so to me, I thought at a minimum, I need to cultivate the space where I was operating as a young Mason first and make sure that that was appropriate. And then over time, I started, and Michael, you know him, Jason Van Dyke, I started writing papers, things that I found very interesting for the District of Columbia's membership magazine that would come out every quarter or so. And so over time, that grew into, hey, I want to write something about my lodge. It eventually got into the Grand Lodge. I started writing more. I started looking at the Grand Lodge Library. And so basically the only difference is the scope got wider. It got bigger. The topics started getting bigger. The topics started focusing on, the White House and congressmen and Freemasonry, and it sort of just ballooned over time. And what I realized was, as I was getting to this larger scope, I needed to start looking at, well, what have other people been writing on? Or who has been writing on these topics? And so I got into the Philalethes, I got into the Scottish Rite Research Society, because I was very concerned about getting access to primary resources. And so Adam and I, this is an issue we always deal with, which dealing with citing and primary resources. And do you have the original text, or do you have reprints, or can you get access to these resources? So if you're a good researcher, you're always looking for those primary resources, access to those primary resources. Adam and I have had literally conversations where, he is excited because he found in a university, somewhere across the country, the papers of someone, X individual that he's working on a paper for. And it's exciting because we don't know where those things are. And so part of that research process is the excitement of discovery. And so that's what I would say to answer your question. The scope got larger. My demands, my needs got larger for more primary resource, more access to these resources. And so getting access and joining these organizations helped me get access to those resources.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I have a not necessarily parallel, but a lot of similar points, and I won't bore you with the long details. But I had, back then to now, what have I gained? A lot more knowledge, or a lot more insight into how I can acquire information. I always like, because I like to, now that I'm in my mid 50s, I get to play the old man, and I get to say that learning how to use the library informed me on how to find things on the internet.
The Dewey Decimal System. There you go. Props.
Well, not just that, but the logic involved, the process involved in acquiring hard-won information in a library archive is completely, some would say, well, we have the internet now and it's so easy. Yes, it's at your fingertips. But the methodology is very similar as you would in a library and archive to acquire information, to be able to take an idea and to translate it into something that the computer understands, or where to go to find it. And you can get that by doing wide casting of, again, I'll use that metaphor of that tired metaphor of the net, and throwing a name out there on the internet. That helps, because more and more you will find things appear on the internet as knowledge is digitized, whereas before it wasn't. But also, nothing will ever replace your library. Don't let them die. And then that's my PSA. And then your network of friends. Don't stop having friends who do research, because they're also involved in searching through archives where they can introduce you to others who will find something in those archives. And especially in the context of Freemasonry, where we have the ability to touch on our fraternal connections in order to gain access, whereas someone else wouldn't be able to get into those archives. Now that brings up the other issue and the other side of the problem that I have been always banging that drum, working with Masonic archives, Chris as well, is many of these Masonic archives are woefully underappreciated, so much that they are not cataloged, and nobody knows what's in there, or they're rotten, or they've been thrown away without anybody getting to know, or they've been destroyed, just outright destroyed, because the building was sold and they didn't know what to do with it, or floods, you know, the ruthless hand of ignorance and whatnot, you know. So that the appreciation for knowledge is what I have gained, and even more so because I was always kind of interested in this sort of path all my life. But as I had mentors that moved me along in my path and encouraged me to start looking at these research organizations and to find something. And I'll tell this story. It's a golden moldy, but I always thought I was sort of a generalist. And at that time I was working with the archives of the Grand Lodge of California, and there was so much there, and I was trying to find what I could work on. And I had other friends that had really started to specialize. And here I am just kind of feeling like a generalist, right? Because I'm always telling the story of Freemasonry in California, and it's very broad narrative. And then I
love that story.
Something. Yeah, I finally found something, and I pursued it, and it really, that's what got me on that kind of stage. And of course, it was a subject that was phenomenally interesting to everybody, very strange and controversial if you wanted it to be. And so that's what kind of got me out there. And I think that I must have done a credible job with it, because I made a trilogy out of these papers. And then eventually things started to snowball for me with getting in touch with other Masonic researchers and meeting the people that I've always admired and wanted to meet. And here they are talking to me about my papers. Like, how can I, you know, and I was undegreed at that time, and I did not have my graduate history degree. I'd gone through my undergrad, but you know, my undergrad's not in history. So I felt like, what am I doing here? Right. And to those of you who may think you don't belong, you'll still feel that way, even if you were a professional historian, because, you know, there's a little bit of fanboyism in me. But, you know, what can I say to history, or what can I say about history? Me, who hasn't studied as long as someone else, but you do, if you have a good hypothesis, you have a good narrative, and you are on the right track, you know, people will help you, and they will appreciate and respect you. Most professionals, whether they're archivists, historians, etc., love to give their knowledge out, because it's not theirs to hoard. Because if they did, nothing would get done, and two, everything would be destroyed, because everybody would be mishandling all of this information and throwing it out. So it's incumbent upon these professions, these knowledge-based professions, to impart their knowledge, and they want to help people. And so that's another aspect of my journey, is the meeting those that have been able to assist me to make me become more knowledgeable, but also more appreciative of the acquisition of knowledge. That's where I guess that could sum it up.
So we live in a really we live in a really interesting time right now, where I can't even count how many Masonic blogs or even other podcasts that are out there. We have a lot of brothers that, thanks to the communication world that we live in now, they want to get out there and share that light with lots of excitement. This runs into an issue. So I'd like to kind of get your definition on what the difference is between a blog for a website, an article, versus a research paper. If you want to get into like just the scope or some of the work that goes into it, maybe the discussion topics, how it's formatted, however you want to do it, just so that brothers that are listening going, well, you know, I'm kind of writing right now for my lodge website, or as Brother Ruli said, hey, I want to write something for my, you know, Grand Lodge newsletter that's going to be coming out. How do you take an idea like that and maybe scaffold it up to become a research paper if you've never written one before?
Do you want me to go, Adam, or you want to go first? Okay, sorry. Well, to me, I think the research papers that Adam and I are talking about fit in a unique criteria. I think the stuff that is submitted to the Philalethes and AQC and Scottish Rite or wherever are topics that tended to be stuff that has not really been published before, tends to be newer information, newer insights, things that you don't necessarily get from a source that's already been published. So, for example, you're not going to see a lot of Mackey, you're not going to see a lot of Manly P. Hall, you're not going to see a lot of the very popular things that you sort of
the Mount Rushmores of Freemasonry.
right. So to me, it's in order to answer that question, Michael, you have to start and say first, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to just educate and inform the audience with a little bit of information about a certain topic? Well, then that to me is more of a blog. If you are creating new research, if you have identified things that have not been published in Masonic periodicals or journals, you found it through research, accessing libraries or historical societies or, original documents that have not been published in any source, that to me tends to be more on the research side. That means that you've fleshed out this paper. This paper has, you've reviewed the topic as best as you can. You've seen what others have written, and you're adding to that commentary. You're creating knowledge, or you're creating something new from things that never were new in the first place. So you're really effectively creating something new. And to me, that's what are the types of things that are produced in research journals that we're talking about, the big three. We're trying to identify new stuff in order to share it with a broad audience. Now, sometimes that doesn't necessarily have to be, look, this old manuscript that's never been published before, I'm going to publish it. Sometimes it's a new perspective. Sometimes it's criticism on something that has already been published. And that is the kind of material that I think we're looking more towards, because there are certain topics that has just been picked over. So, it's either, but your perspectives on a topic may not have been, or your personal perspectives on the topic, bringing in, other academic, academic ideas or academic insights. I think that is something that we're looking for when you're talking about a research journal. If you're talking about a blog post, if you're talking about, here are 6 paragraphs on the history of Teddy Roosevelt, well, you don't necessarily need to submit that to a research journal, because that topic's been picked over. But if you write it in a blog and you share it with others, I think there's certainly value there. Adam, what do you think?
Yeah, all of those things. And that highlights the difference between publishing for a journal, or even a book for that matter, a monograph, or a blog, or a presentation. And you have to ask yourself, would this be better as a blog, or better as a lecture for my brothers at a lodge? Or is this a paper that can be developed into a publishable manuscript? And these are important distinctions, but they're all valid, because there is nothing wrong with a lecture for a lodge, but that is different from a paper that is publishable or published in a journal. Now, you may think, well, I'm not academic enough. Well, there is a sort of academic rigor required to publish. However, I don't require anybody to submit their CV or their diplomas. Most of what we learn, the basics of what we learn, how to construct a proper paper, you have already learned in high school, I hope. I mean, I don't know, things change, right? I learned cursive. Some people don't. But
it's our secret communication code, Adam. Nobody under the age of 25 can break that one.
I can go on a rant about cursive, because, and this is applicable to what we're talking about research. Let me take a little detour here. I am able to read 18th and 19th century script, which a lot of our Masonic history is in, because I know how to read cursive.
Right.
Is it still hard? Oh my God, yes.
Oh,
especially when you had the guys with unsteady hands and are using quills or, just ink pens that smear all over the place. It still is difficult. But I tell you, if you don't know how to read cursive, it's just like when all the communications go down, and those of us like myself who do not know Morse code because they don't teach it anymore, and I never bothered to learn it, full disclosure, I will die hungry. So in any case, these skills that you acquire, such as reading cursive, are all important. And then finally, the building, using them as a building block for your paper. And as an editor, I can safely say that if it's a good paper that has a great idea, we will definitely work with you.
Yes.
But there we do have style guides that you should follow and consider, and then we will work with you. And so, because you may not know this, but we know it in our hearts. We don't know this intellectually sometimes, but in our hearts, it makes sense that when you write something, it is not born perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process. So for every great book, Masonic or otherwise, I like to say there's a good editor behind it too. But I mean, I'm still learning as an editor. But for every great book, there is also the editor who can, and especially if they're a subject matter expert to what they're editing. We're not all subject matter experts, but we can help you get to your destination with your paper. So also what Chris brought up, about the existence of these, why publish for a journal as opposed to a blog or something like that? And it's also been asked, or I've seen it, well, why not just put it out there on the net? Why do we have to pay money to have these things? Well, there's many different reasons, but primarily are these journals provide a framework by which this knowledge can be preserved in an organized, accessible way. The internet is not very, at least as far as I can tell, not organized in that way. And if you throw your knowledge out there for all to see, man, you're not being, for the people, by the people. It's really just creating a confusion of tongues. It will never be seen. This is why these research societies charge money for it. It may seem like a burden because they cost like $50 or something like that. I can guarantee you spend less on an evening dinner, and probably a little bit more than an average fraternal dinner or subscription. But it is so worth it because it provides a framework and a forum by which brothers can gather together with responsible knowledge, just not a confusion of tongues, to paraphrase many other. I don't even know where that comes from. I've seen it in book titles, etc. I didn't make it up. However, it is a confusion of tongues, a Tower of Babel, and this is a problem we're having in this internet age, in politics and society, the rest of society, is because we have so much information. There is a tendency to appreciate it only because it is available and accessible, and we lose a discernment. We have a discernment problem. This is why we have highly intelligent people believing total conspiratorial nonsense.
Right.
Just because you're smart doesn't mean you're not susceptible to a brainwashing or to faulty knowledge, because that sort of information, and if it's designed well and the people writing it know propaganda, they actually believe their own propaganda. That's why it's so effective. That they're able to, you're able to do away with logic and question. So having societies like this that have an academic thrust or a framework helps us weed out conspiracy, nonsense, and also to provide brothers coming into this world with a foundation by which they can start asking new questions, right? They can take from what's been written before. And this is another thing that Chris mentioned, is being able to read what has been written before. That is essential in the study of history. You cannot start writing something. You might be intrigued and go, I'm going to write about that. Read what other people have written about it.
That's right.
Absolutely do it. You're going to read no matter what, because that makes you a better writer. But you're going to have to read what others have written before. And then you may want to, in your paper, do a historiography, which is basically an analysis of the methods by which that person came to their knowledge. Right. Then you can understand the process of not only the history of that topic, but how that history is discovered, how the history writ large is discovered. So you have to get a firm background. I know that sounds like a lot, but it is so worth it. And these are the basic building blocks of any undergraduate history class, is learning about historiography, writing historiography, always reading those who have written about it before. It's so essential because, like I mentioned early on, if you're going to write about Freemasonry in the early or in the 18th century, 1700s, right? You must learn, and depending on where it is, you should probably learn about the 18th century. You should learn about American history in the 18th century, if you're going to be concentrating on that, or European history in these conditions, because Europe and the early Republic or the colonies are interlocked. And so you're going to have to get a touch of what the framework of what is going on. So does that mean that whatever you want to write may be postponed? Yeah, it will. However, when you make it out of that and put your pen to paper, you will be way more informed, way more well-rounded, and more confident, right? You will have gained that knowledge, acquired that knowledge to confidently speak with some authority. You may not know everything, and you may not be like the tops, like so-and-so that's the top of their field, but at least as far as I won't speak for Chris, but for myself, I'm not asking for that, but I want to read a paper and be intrigued and know that the person has really read their material, or I can suggest it to them, and to not be in a rush to be famous, to be the big Masonic author and everything. It takes such a long time. And I personally have not made it there. I mean, I'm not a prolific writer. I mean, I have things in the works, but my fault is I tend to sit on things for a really long time, chew on them, and then call Chris and like get all giddy about it. And eventually I will have something coming out. But history does take time, and I think it's less about the output is important. Don't get me wrong, but I really love the research aspect of it. Where I'm just enveloping myself in that world, right? Anyway,
the way that I describe the difference between the two, between a blog and like a research paper, just having done both, like a blog, at least as far as Craftsmen Online, I think our criteria is we ask for something, if you're interested in submitting, to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 600 words, because sadly, that's really where the average American attention span has gotten to. That's a couple paragraphs, maybe a page and a half, double spaced. So not a lot of knowledge, just an idea that you're kind of sharing there, versus in grad school, I would have been lucky to have gotten an assignment at the beginning of the term saying the capstone will be a 20-page research paper with at least 12 cited. And I think the key thing, I took this note down, and Adam was, mentioning this in his use of the word, but peer reviewed. That is something that is so strong that comes in the research space, which leads me into the next question. I had a conversation, and we all run in small circles here in the Masonic writing space, at least. So I know one brother that uses AI a lot to help generate not just the ideas, but sometimes some of the content for what he puts out. And another brother was like, I go to this website where this guy's writing all of this, and I just kind of take what he says, and then I drop it into AI and have that. And I'm like, we're literally living in a time when a computer is telling you one thing, and as lazy humans, we're copying and pasting that into another AI program to just respin this. I'm sure you guys have been asked this question a million times. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you tonight. Where are you on the use of AI when it comes to research or as a tool in the process for researching?
Well, let me just say this: be your own brain. Be your own brain. I have mixed feelings on it, but I do know that when Wikipedia and all that stuff came out, everybody was freaked out. It's the end of knowledge as we know it. What you have to understand is that these are good starting off points in order to create your, I wouldn't even call it foundation, just your crumbs as you start down as you start down the labyrinth, your trail. But be your own brain, use your own smarts about it, use it as a resource, I suppose, but not to write your paper, not to because in many cases, I would suggest that because it's just a new, highly intelligent trawler, It's scraping all the shrimp off the bottom of the sea, and it may not get the right stuff. And if you do not understand the subject fundamentally, you are susceptible to the wrong information.
That's right. That's right.
You do not understand. You may not understand the nuances of the subject. So that I offer that bit of caution. And also, it's just lazy sometimes. So if you want to be everybody wants to be a writer, but be a researcher. I know that's a common phrase on the internet. Do your research. Well, a lot of people that say that aren't doing the right kind of research. Understand what it means to research. Understand not only that, understand what it means to write, but I would say primarily understand what it means to research, because it is a process. It's a way of life. It's also something you could do forever on your own and be totally satisfied, right? Just understand your limits. Don't be cynical, but be suspicious. Cross-reference, look at different avenues of thought, and you can't always do it on the internet. You can do it more than ever. I've found things that I never thought I would find, but this is someone like myself who has traveled to go find knowledge too. So fortunately, we may not have to do that. Although I do recommend it because it's fun. Why are you in England? Oh, I'm researching. It sounds pretty romantic, right? But just be your own brain. Understand your limitations, but understand your own intelligence and celebrate that. Don't just plop off to AI because it's going to get you started. That sounds harsh, I guess, but I have pretty mixed feelings on it. Chris?
I'm actually going to be even more harsh than Adam is, and I think you shouldn't submit any paper to any of the big three if you're utilizing AI.
Right, and I don't mean to interrupt. I didn't suggest that you should use it.
No, and you didn't. But what I'm saying is, I'm outwardly telling you now, if you submit a paper that leverages or uses AI, number one, we will see it because we have tools that we can put that information into a reference tool, an online reference tool that can tell us that you used AI. Number one. Number two, if you don't cite that, there are plagiarism, there are serious issues associated to that. And because AI scrapes from, as Adam says, current resources and other, there are plagiarism issues. There are ethical issues involved in using AI. Now, what I will say is the goal of a good research paper is that when someone reads your paper, and this is part of the peer review process that I love this part of the process, because what I'm seeing how you are trying to work through a problem. So a research paper is you trying to define that problem and then trying to answer that problem, or trying to figure out what that problem is. And then you're elaborating to the reader, to me, how you got to that point. So you say, John, we have an issue, and if you're doing a biography or a history on a certain event, or there perhaps a criticism, you'll say, author X believes XYZ in his book. Well, you're cultivating a case to be made for your paper. And that's the best part about a research paper, because it's a mystery, it's a riddle, and you are using as many resources that you could find to help answer that riddle or perhaps craft the message. When you submit a paper with AI, what you're basically telling me is you don't have time to think through your case. You're asking others to do the work for you, or even worse, you're asking a machine that's scraping the internet using God knows antiquated information. It's sort of like going to a doctor's office and then having the doctor in front of you say, wait a minute, I'm going to go online right now and type in these symptoms, and I'm going to let the machine tell me what it is. Well, actually, I came to you to help me diagnose what the problem is. And I'd feel very uncomfortable if the doctor just turned around and he's looking at ChatGPT going, illness, short of breath. Well, it looks like you're having a heart attack. So, thanks for coming in. So, I have an issue with that. It's cheating.
Yeah. It's
a valuable art. It's cheap.
cheap.
It's you're cheating the valuable art. And also, I don't consider research papers. I consider research papers pieces of art. It's word. It's the words. It's poetry. It's rhythm. It's rhyme. Adam is a fantastic. He writes well. He has beautiful prose. I will never get to the point where Adam writes. He writes so well. I write more of in a journalistic style. That's my style versus Adam.
And that's
who
where I
writes
can compliment you. He gets to the point.
well.
We're
Not when I'm speaking, clearly, but yes, I get to the point in the paper. But it is a piece of art. So why cheapen it? Why cheapen this piece of art by going online and using a machine to basically rate your art? And by the way, I've already done this myself. I was really anxious about when the White House and the Freemasons went online, because we put an audiobook version of it. And so I went online and started going through ChatGPT, trying to see, give me a list of all the Masonic activities that happened to the President of the United States. I was glad to find inaccurate statements, wrong dates, wrong figures, wrong. And so I was like, okay, great. At least my book is still somewhat useful, because the information online is completely false when it comes to free.
Oh, good.
It's
None of the wrong information was attributed to you. It was
no, it was attributed to other people. But go ahead, Adam.
It's not a panacea, or AI, I should say, but the internet can be quite useful, especially when you go to universities or any kind of academic archive. They create painstaking finding aids for you. And it takes a little bit of time, but we've been talking about the disadvantages of AI. Ultimately, after all of the unethical activities and everything like that, ultimately you're robbing yourself. Do you want to walk around and you can publish something that's totally AI generated, but knowing deep down you never did it? You're fraud. You're right. And again, I don't want to sound mean for those who have used it for certain things for their own benefit or anything like that. But as far as putting out a published paper, just please don't do it. You're not going to advance in. You're not going to be able to acquire proper knowledge, and this is key. It's what I've been getting at, even with when I belabored you with my own journey. I believe in that. I love these myths of the acquisition of knowledge, even if it is frightening. One of my favorite myths is Theseus and the Minotaur, and this journey into the labyrinth and finding this really sad, horrific creature, and this whole terror of getting to that point and then emerging out of it by the help of others who are your allies, etc. And I have had papers where I have gone into that labyrinth, but you have to have help, and you only gain that knowledge through that help and through the willingness to go on those journeys. With AI, etc., it sounds flashy and neat, but it's actually quite boring. And ersatz, I get to use that word.
There it is.
It's ersatz. It's fake. It's a facsimile of knowledge. It's like being a cyborg. It's just implanted memory. Like what Blade Runner, right? They had memories. The replicants had memories, and they didn't even know where they got them.
Right. Well, even Masonically speaking, you're violating your own integrity when you're using this. And I think the biggest thing that you're losing, and you guys are both touching on it, is what I would say is the most beautiful part of writing is when you actually, the writer has a voice and you're reading their work and you get it. Like for me, the example I give is Malcolm Gladwell. Years before he had his podcast, or was like a popular guest on television shows, he was writing these wonderful books, and just the way that he wrote them, I was like, well, this is a very interesting way he puts the words together. And then when I would hear him talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's narrating his own books. I can now hear his voice in everything I read from him moving past. So I think you guys have definitely touched on a big thing that every writer should know before they get started. I think this is an exciting also moment for our Blue Lodges, is that this is the first time I can recall in recent history where brothers are looking forward to saying, hey, I have something I want to say in Lodge. Either they want to write a paper or they want to put some sort of PowerPoint presentation or program together. So we've talked about what to avoid. I'd like to get your insight on what new researchers or brothers who want to dive into a topic and do a presentation for Lodge, what should they be doing?
Well, I want to touch on something because we just advocated for something that we learn in our degrees, grammar and rhetoric. Developing your writing style can help you develop your rhetoric, your rhetorical style, your voice, finding your voice. It's also part of not just, we talked about violation of vows and everything like that, but it's really what you want to do is spread knowledge, not disinformation and ignorance, right? This is something that we especially in the Scottish Rite is vows against, is avowed against. So yes, and so given that, what should they be learning? Chris, you're hot. You're there. Go ahead.
Well, I think what you can do is join the organization, join one of these organizations, or join all three organizations. Get some of the materials that they give you. Get the journals. Crack open the journals and see what people are writing right now. See what contemporary Masonry looks like, contemporary Masonic research looks like. And if you have the ability to look through past editions, take a look at those past editions. If there's a topic in your mind, I'm interested in Hiram Abiff. I'm interested in the Temple of Solomon. I'm interested in the evolution of the ritual. I'm interested in XYZ. Go see what has been written about it. Go see and take a look and try to maybe ask questions or reach out to the editors, reach out to us, and we can guide you to indexes and different things that have been created to help you go and take a look and just crack open and look at those articles. Read the articles, read the way that they're written, read the arguments for or against. Art de Hoyos always publishes new stuff through the Scottish Rite Research Society, like they're called the bonus books. So you get this new book, crack that open and take a look at the things that he talks about. So, it really depends on the topic that you're interested in. Once you find that topic, go see what's been written about it. And that way it can help you figure out, what am I interested in? What am I not interested in? I was one of these guys that was really interested in esoteric topics when I came into Masonry, became a Master Mason. And then really my focus shifted on history because I realized the history stuff has not yet been cultivated. There's still all these stories and all these different things that haven't been written yet. And I think, Michael, we may have alluded to this the last podcast of like every state has all these stories. Adam came up created this great biography on a past Grand Master of California that hasn't been written until Adam worked on it and, created this large biography on this guy. It's been 200 plus years. And you're telling me Adam is the first one to do it? Well, yeah, because
people have written about him, but just in disparate sources, but I found new sources and strung it all together. Sure.
And that's the point. My what I'm trying to say is find a topic that you're interested in, or take a look at what's being currently published and written about on contemporary Masonry. If you find something that you're interested in, dive into the material and see what's been published before. See who's published it. Sometimes there's authors like me who have a narrow focus on a certain interest or subject. And so dive in and see what's been written, and then take what's been written and write it out and do it in a way where you're trying to explain it to your friend, or, Michael, I'm trying to explain you a story. Write out that presentation like you're trying to explain a story. Okay, there's a guy named Hiram Abiff, and then this guy named, the web monitors, or what happened with monitors, or, how ritual is disseminated, like all that stuff. Just do it in a story. Write it in a way you can communicate to a friend about a story, and then that will help you craft your message. There's a different part of your brain that you utilize to communicate a story to someone versus writing it down with someone. I realize now I can't write pen and paper anymore. Mechanically, I can only write on a computer and go back and I don't like this sentence, I have to go back. When I'm writing on paper, it takes a different part of my brain to sit there and scratch that sentence out and now have to rewrite the sentence rather than deleting it. But I still see that old sentence and it messes me up. And so I'm using a different part of my brain. So if you're doing
They have drugs for that now, Chris.
I'm so glad. Thank goodness. They have drugs for many of things. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, if you're doing it for a presentation versus you're doing it for writing, start working on it and just work on it and work on it and work on it. Ask for help. Ask Adam for help. Ask other people for help, and we can help you guide that way.
I want to jump off of that. And when you're looking at resources or looking for resources, the best thing to do is look at a book, what they've written, what's been written before, combined indices, but also the references and footnotes. That's what they're for. And you can go, and that's great because you can go often if you can find it. Many authors or many historians will seek out primary sources. Secondary sources are good. You need them. But the primary source is the gold, because often if you have that, you can see where what others may have missed, right? And that has always been my intention. Not just to rub someone's nose in it, but to get those primary sources. When you find them, you're golden. And often new histories are created by finding what others have done and then pushing them together, seeing where they fit, examining who said what, and then moving on to your own idea. And that's exactly what I did with Chris referenced with this biography I did. And it's been revised and whatnot. So that's important. And everything, no work is complete. You will occasionally get the opportunity to revise your work. What's even better is to find a little kernel that a historian has left off and, said, hey, I didn't get to this in my study. This is something for a future historian. I love finding those. That's a gift to you. Seek those out. But again, where do you start? Where do you get your inspiration? It's really soul searching. I wouldn't start out by just wanting to do history and wow your friends, because that's not the point. I know that there's now more than ever, there's an avenue finally for people like us to do Masonic history. You see it a lot. There's symposia, there's presentations abound. We're on the result of this, a podcast, because there is a wide audience for it. I mean, when I came into Freemasonry on Monday, I will have been a Mason, meaning I was initiated 30 years ago on Monday.
Congratulations.
So I'm less than some and more than others, I suppose, or more, whatever, however I'm still a youngin' compared to some of the brothers I know, but now I've hit some kind of weird landmark. So I can say in my day, but definitely in my day, I'm considered, I'm going to be 55. When I came into Freemasonry, I was sort of shocked that there wasn't an avenue for this. And so when I wanted to give presentations, you've got 5 minutes, which is not long enough. But in a way, I kind of treat that now as like, wow, that my older self should have celebrated that, because now it's like, man, I still can't do something in 5 minutes. However, keeping it short and sweet is the recommendation. That's where, in that kind of hardline attitude, I think that's what they were really getting at. That's the old man kindness coming out of me. I'm no longer, mean and like, how dare you give me 5 minutes? I want 2 hours. I'm in awe.
Speaking of time, I do want to be respectful of both of your time. We've kind of gone over the hour that we allotted for this recording. So I have 2 questions left. I'm just curious if you guys are cool to do a little extra bonus time with me. That'd be
keep it short. We'll keep it short.
Well, let me finish.
No.
Let me finally get to my point. Is that, and I really apologize, is that now more than ever there's an opportunity, and so it's incumbent upon us to produce good work. It can't just be it can't be the Wikipedia of Masonry. I want to encourage brothers to really take it seriously, and it's not to be, it will only serve you well. That's in short.
So we started this podcast talking about a project that the both of you are working on, that supposedly are communicating with each other on somewhat of a regular, if not weekly basis. What are you guys working on, and what can you tell us about it?
Herodom?
Yeah. So Adam is done with. We sent it to the printer, and so creating a copy of Herodom takes a while, not just, getting the papers, but doing the peer review process, which would take a couple months or weeks to months, and then laying it out, and then getting the index. And then there's so many parts of that process that Adam has done a fantastic job, and yeoman's work. I sort of came in half the process, and so assisting him. So I'm eager to help him during the full process of one edition of this journal. And so, oftentimes those are the issues that we're talking about, looking at when people submit papers, going through the peer review, which is Adam and I will look at a paper separately. He'll send me a copy. I'll go it through, and then I'll add my notes and comments and suggestions and edits. I'll send it over to him. He'll take a look, or if he's already done it, I'll look at his comments and go, hey, you missed this, or blah, blah, blah. And so one of the things that it looks like is, when you get a paper from Adam and I, when it's reviewed, the thing is cut to death. I mean, it looks like it went through every battle of the Civil War and back again. I mean, but it's not that it's bad. In fact, we're excited and it's good and it's in the right direction. It's just we're asking questions, and sometimes we're rearranging structures. And so we're just trying to fit the format of the journal. And so many times we're having those types of discussions, getting ready. How's this paper? What's this paper looking like? Do we have to go back to the author and ask these questions? What do you think this person was thinking about here? Stuff like that. And this entire process to me, is one of my favorite parts of the process. I hate the things about creating an index and having to deal with the printers and all that stuff. But getting to read people's papers, providing their comments and feedback, and then sending it back to them and saying, oh, thanks so much. I'll work on these. That's the part that I really like.
I agree. I do enjoy some of the layout, but I am not a professional indexer. I'll have to state that out. That's an actual profession. But if you ever get to do an index, you will see new dimensions of your mind. I'm not knocking it. It's a useful talent. Let me tell you that. Mm-hmm. Chris is far more analytical than I am, and he's done them too. And I think he's agreeing with me. It is a special type of mind to produce an index. But what Chris has described is, and this is important to know, from every single corner of the Masonic publishing world, from groups that not the quote unquote big three, everybody deals with it. They may not do indices, but they are sort of, they're doing a similar process. And I would describe it as farm to table. We are reaching out to people to get us papers, because it's not like we get a glut of them. And that is something I want to encourage brothers to do. I know that everything's online and you can state your case online on podcasts or blogs and stuff like that. There is nothing more special than a well-constructed paper. Don't let anybody tell you any differently. There is still room for, when you say print is dead, I dare you to prove this. There is an art to it, and it is such a process that you will be proud of. So we get people to give us the papers, we edit them. That author is thereby transformed into a new human being. And we are too, because we've learned something new as well. It only stings for a little bit. I mean, getting a red line paper is pretty intense, but you've already been accepted. We've already accepted you.
We like your work.
We like your work. So that, don't worry, we like you.
Yeah.
If we didn't like it, it wouldn't be edited so heavily. I mean, right. But things do, it's a process. And then getting it laid out, getting it indexed. When you submit, you should, when you go to these organizations, see if they have a style guide. They often do. Follow those, because you can't get around it. But that helps you communicate even better. It makes your work into, you may be used to seeing it on Word or whatever word processing software you're using, but seeing it in our template in Garamond with all the images, and you have to get rights for those images, by the way, I have to warn you. But everything it looks so organized and beautiful. It's what you always dreamed about. So I'm really proud of the work we do. And as most of these brothers who go through painstaking hours, it could be an occasional journal that they produce, but these are labors of love, and they do it out of the love for the knowledge. And so I want to give a shout out to, I know we've talked about the quote unquote big three. I want to reiterate that there are several different research organizations that are so worthy of your attention. And when we were talking earlier about reading what's been written, those are the ones you go to as well. Don't ignore them, right? Try to get a wide variety of what is being read. You have to use discernment, I suppose, but you should be reading what is published. These ones that we're working with, they have a long history, and that's what makes it so kind of really intense, for at least for me, is because I'm jumping in as a Johnny come lately with all of these organizations they have such a magnificent history behind them. So there's a lot of weight on your shoulders. You don't want to be that guy, right? To produce something that's, like, oh God, those years, the Kendall years,
the dark years, yes.
Because, these are the things that I go through in my head, because, Brent Morris with Herodom, Brent Morris created, he was not single-handedly, but he carried that organization, and he was the editor for many, many years. And he was one of the people that had the idea for the Scottish Rite Research Society. Brent is a man of many talents and such a kind man, and he is so talented and universally well loved. And then to end up being able to inherit his baby, his creation is an honor, but it's also, I'm cognizant. The same goes with being in Quarter Coronati Lodge. There's so many people that have come before me, and I stand amongst giants. And with Philalethes, it's a really intense situation, and it's admirable. But I feel a lot of weight, and I'm committed to doing the best I can do. Just as all of these brothers who produce these works, as they're doing the best they can do, and I believe in supporting that.
Well, to quote the words of our Grandmaster, Most Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin in New York, we are just merely a steward in the time that we serve our brothers of the lodge. So I think that extends to that point. I really enjoyed this conversation tonight. I got one last question to get you out of here, but just to recap for our listener, we've talked about the big three. We've talked about the difference between blogging, research, avoiding AI, what every writer should know or researcher should know before they get started. We've also had two, I think, great future album cover titles from Adam, Confusion of Tongues and New Dimensions of Your Mind. I think those will be great new alternative band album covers.
They have been used already.
You definitely spot the brother from California with those quotables. I want to get you out of here on this question. We talked a lot about writing and looking to the future, which I think is so unique as we look back to the past. Are there any historical topics or themes that you're looking forward to the next generation of Masons to explore or take us into their world of discovery on?
I want to bring something up. You mentioned Confusion of Tongues. That's probably it's a quote from something. I think it might be.
Is that a Genesis album? I want to say it's a Genesis album.
There is a brother, or he's not a brother. He's a writer, Charles Ferguson. He wrote a book called The Confusion of Tongues: A Review of Modern Isms. So there's one use of the Confusion of Tongues title. So it's not. Again, I'll reiterate, it's not my creation, but you can. We'll make the album together.
Nice.
So I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
So we talked a lot about writing in the future of research. We often look back, and Chris talked about it's so exciting to go back and explore history. So are there any topics or historical areas that you're looking forward to as we are all getting older as time passes? The next generation of Masons that are coming through, what are you looking forward to them exploring or sharing their discovery work on?
That's a really good question. I'm going to claim, I don't know. And this sounds awful, but I have been so in my own head. Because I do all of this editing and other things, it's hard to get to my own work. So I'm looking forward to the work I'm going to produce because I still have a few things I need to say, right? I've have a couple subjects that I've been really dying to get at for several years. I mean, it's sitting on this for several years. So I'm encouraging myself, my future self, to do that. But for future brothers, I mean, because I also run a Masonic library, I want them to, in figuring that out, I can't tell them what to study. There's such a vast landscape for them to study, but I want them to use those Masonic libraries. I want to find their inspiration in these archives, use their lodge archives. Because one thing, if you were ever to want to find it, I won't say it's an easy subject, but it's a good one. I'm an advocate of local history. There's so much to be found about your local history. There is a network of local historians, no matter where you go throughout the world. But let's pick on the United States. That they would be appreciative because the fraternal organization has been, I'm not going to say it's been forgotten, but in recent past, it's kind of shunted off men in phony hats, et cetera, et cetera. We've almost believed that narrative, that we even have that narrative, but really people are fascinated by it. And it is a unique lens. So when you study history, there's different disciplines, and there's like social history, cultural history. And I guess fraternal history would fall under probably social history, or cultural history. You use these lenses by which to study different subjects and the fraternal perspective on the building blocks of your own community. I can only pick on the West in California. Many of our early institutions, the first institutions in some of these, in the American conquest of California, the first institutions were usually a Masonic lodge forming and building constructing its building, and then everything else, right? These are the building blocks, this fraternal organization, because it's able to dispense with sectarianism and partisanism and gets right to the core of the human experience I think at the most basic level. And so rather than getting too complex with everything, with these heavy ideas of spirituality or mythology or whatever, you can see the expression of these ideas or these high-minded concepts within the interactions of human beings in your own communities. And this is what is told in your lodge records. It's a false narrative told by disgruntled brothers that your minute books are boring. They're only as boring as they write them. And yeah, I've seen some pretty boring ones, but I will say the 19th century ones are pretty interesting. Oh, yeah. How they wrote their eulogies for each other. You get the sense they truly liked each other. Yep. It's how they styled certain things, how they left. You could even tell how they left certain information out if they were talking about somebody. Say they were, expelled or something like that. Or whatever, how they spoke about certain things in their community. It really shows an interaction between a lodge and its own community. These are valuable insights. So to make a long story short, that's what I would encourage future brothers to pursue, because when it's gone, it's gone. And in many cases, these lodges that I even know are here today may not be here in another 20 years when I'm in my 70s. So get it while it's hot, right? It is there for you. I am dismayed sometimes when, it's a natural. When I came into Freemasonry, and I still love the idea of these deeper searches, but you can find them in local sources, right? These metaphysical concepts are no good unless they are applicable in your daily life. And this compulsion for people to gather together to form in tribes, even though they proclaim themselves as individuals, to find a common good amongst each other. That's an expression of a communal love and of an agape or whatnot. That is endlessly fascinating. And instead of burdening oneself with this, especially if you are not to extend in this vast world of religious studies and you don't speak 14 different languages, your local sources are the best start to find what is good about humanity, right? So anyway, there's my proselytizing.
I've got two things that I jotted down. So number one, access to digital. So I think that we're going to see, as Adam mentioned, as he said, if we're looking local, if lodges start to look at their own minutes, look at their towns, look at their, the fraternity, what the fraternity looked like in their town in the last 100 plus years, there are great stories there. And historical societies, state societies, universities are moving towards a digital space where you can easily access this stuff. Hopefully, lodges realize and recognize, and Grand Lodges recognize that this should stuff be digitized. These books are only going to get older, only going to get more difficult to access. They should start to digitize these things. And by doing that, you make things more accessible. We are in a spot right now, it's shocking, but it's actually true. We're in a spot right now where the most Masonic information has ever been available online. There are books in the Count Calistrago library of stuff that's been digitized that very few people have even took a look at or thought about that can serve as the focus for books in the future. We just haven't gotten through that yet. Masonic research hasn't gone through that yet. I hope they do that. So that was number one, access to digital resources. Number two, I'm very curious about this. I hope that there is a researcher or researchers out there in the wild that will do it. But the impact of social media on the fraternal experience. Has that been positive? Has that been negative? What are the effects? Sure, it's brought people together. Adam talked about agape, about communal groups, identifying people out there and bringing these communities together. Has Masonry identified and found these people? Has technology helped them connect people into Masonry? We don't know that yet. We haven't seen that, as well as the data is not out there. It's not being, well, I think there is some data out there. We just don't know it. It's not as easily accessible. And then also, has that been a hindrance? Now that you are a Mason, how do you engage in this in the fraternal sphere? You know it as well as I do. I think there was a prohibition on, hey, if you're going to talk about Freemasonry in the public sphere, how do you do that in a way that you respect the craft, you respect yourself, especially in a very political climate right now where people are saying stuff, Masons are saying stuff to other Masons that I don't think they would necessarily be saying if they were right in front of each other, but they do it online. So what's the negative? Is there a negative? Is it positive? What's the consequence of that? So access to social or digital resources, and then what's the impact of social media? I'm very curious about that stuff. I'm very curious to see if researchers will do some research on that.
Here's another golden nugget. Within the Masonic sphere, the ethical handling of information, what can be published and what cannot.
Sure.
That's, just because it's in minute books, etc., there are certain things that may not be appropriate, I suppose, or should be, you should investigate how it should be handled. And every library or institute will have rules on this sort of thing, the ethical handling of information, right? That's another thing to study, I think, especially when everybody, well, not everybody, but when there is a dash for these records. So learn about those things too before publishing. And I want to, what Chris and I have both talked about is not to make it sound so daunting, but it is a process. But what you should know is that there are brothers that delight in talking about this and will help and give advice. Always ask questions. I mean, I'm never not on the phone with somebody, Chris, especially about asking advice on something, because there's always advice to give.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate both of you taking this time and some extra time to share your advice on this episode of the Craftsmen Online podcast. Brother Adam Kendall and Brother Chris Ruli, thank you both for coming back.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Talk to you soon. Bye, Adam.